Hello, this is Deb Wenger. So, as we move toward writing your first news story, we need to talk a little bit about the writing process. The most important part, in many people's opinions, of any news story is what's called the lead. So, what is a lead? Essentially, the lead is the opening to a news story. In print or online, it's generally going to be the first sentence. And on average, the lead is going to run about 25 to 30 words. Of course, that doesn't mean there aren't excellent leads that are much fewer than 25 to 30 words or somewhat longer than 25 to 30 words, but that's a rule of thumb. In broadcast, the lead is the first sentence, or it may even be a sentence fragment. Sometimes a broadcast story might open with just a few words that grab someone's attention. So here's an example of a lead that was posted on CNN.com. Isaac slashed its way further inland Thursday, claiming its first fatality and stranding residents in flood-prone areas, even as it threatened to wreak more havoc in the days to come. So that's 31 words. It's a little bit longer than some leads, but it pretty much follows that rule of thumb. So how did the writer determine that that was the information that he or she wanted to put first in the story? Well, it's likely that the writer was thinking about the information within the story, the answers to the 5 W's and the H within the story that were most likely to grab attention. So the whole point of a lead is to get somebody to read or watch the entire story. So in thinking about all of the information that this writer had available, the answers to the 5 W's and the H, he or she selected the 2 that he wanted to answer. So in this lead, we're answering the what. So it's a storm that has come through, killed at least one person, and has stranded others by flooding, and that it had been on Thursday, and it was expected to continue to happen. But you don't see all the 5 W's and the H answered in this lead, right? We don't know exactly where. There is a lot of inland and a lot of coast in the U.S., so we don't know exactly where this has occurred. That's not in the lead. We don't know exactly why this storm has formed. I mean, we know that a storm is causing flooding and has been blamed for this fatality. We don't know exactly how the fatality happened. We don't know exactly who the people are that have been stranded or the person who died. So the writer had to determine which of the 5 W's and the H were most likely to grab the audience's attention. So knowing the identity of the fatality is not likely to be a big attention grabber unless it happens to be somebody really well known. So good leads consider the audience. They think about what is most likely to interest the most readers, users, viewers, etc. And here's an example from a broadcast outlet, CBS Evening News, that we're going to watch. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to sit through a commercial here for a couple seconds before we can get to the lead for this story. So I want you to pay careful attention to what this lead has to say and which of the 5 W's and the H are answered by the first sentence.
Today, the Connecticut Supreme Court ruled that the state can force a 17-year-old to undergo chemotherapy to save her life. Don Daler now on the case of the girl known only as Cassandra C.
Cassandra was diagnosed with
Okay, so if that lead worked, it probably made you a little bit annoyed that I stopped the story, right? It only gave you enough information to, the writer hopes, make you want to keep watching. So what questions were answered in that lead? Well, certainly the what, that the courts are going to force a 17-year-old to undergo chemotherapy that might be able to save her life. To some extent, the who. We know that it's a young woman only known by the name of Cassandra C. That's about all we're going to know. But it doesn't answer the why. So hopefully the story will tell us why A, she needs chemo, B, the courts have said she has to have it, C, why she didn't want it in the first place. So there are lots of whys that you want answered, but that wasn't included in the lead. We also don't know the how. How can you force someone to undergo this chemo? We know the where because we know it was in Connecticut, but we might get more specifics. So all of the 5 W's and the H need to be answered, but not necessary in the lead. You want that lead to give you the answers to the questions that are going to intrigue you most, are going to interest you most into listening further or reading further. So there are lots of different types of leads, but what we're going to focus on in this class is what's called the summary lead. So just like the name implies, the summary lead is going to summarize the main focus of the story. It very seldom will include all 5 W's and the H because you're trying to get somebody to read further. And in the case of broadcast specifically, if you tried to pack all of the who, what, when, why, where, and how into a lead, it would become very difficult for somebody just listening to the information to absorb it all. So in broadcast in particular, you break down the lead and the subsequent portions of the story to include 1 to 2 key points per sentence or per paragraph because you don't want to overwhelm someone with too much information. So this lead example, this was a Washington Post lead. This comes close, in my view, to being a little overwhelming. It might have a tad too much wordiness. But you'll see here, Harvard University is investigating about 125 undergraduates accused of jointly submitting responses, some word for word identical, on a spring take-home final exam in violation of an explicit no collaboration policy. All right, so that feels a little wordy. I don't think that would work all that well as a broadcast lead, but in print or online, obviously you can go back and review. So what questions are answered in this lead? Well, we know what, right? We know that Harvard is investigating potential cheating at its school. We know that it was 125 undergraduates, but we don't really know who specifically. We don't really know when the investigation has begun. We know that the violation, or perceived violation, probably was in late spring. But really the question that we have best answered is what? So an investigation into a cheating scandal, and a little bit of the how. So how the cheating presumably occurred, but not really how the investigation is going to be handled, or why the students may have begun or thought that this was okay. So it leaves more questions unanswered than it answers, and that's really the point of this exercise of our walking through these, is you're not going to answer all the questions in the lead. You're going to answer the questions that you think are most likely to intrigue the most people. So not everyone's going to be interested in the story. I'm interested because obviously I'm in higher ed, but some guy who drives an oil truck in Alaska may care less about this story. I think the fact that it's Harvard and they're considered one of the elite schools in the country, and some of their students may have been violating ethical policies or cheating policies, I think it does make it interesting to a broader range of people. So when you are sitting down to write your first lead, you have to ask yourself, what's the story? You can't write a compelling lead until you have a story focus. And to focus a story, you really need to be able to answer that question, what is this story? A good focus most likely is going to be able to be articulated in 1 sentence or less. It doesn't have to be a long 2-paragraph explanation. In fact, you're probably not focused enough if it takes you 3 or 4 sentences to explain. I always recommend that you ask yourself, what's the most interesting thing I learned in my news gathering process? And 9 out of 10 times, that will get me to a story focus. So let's take a look at a video interview conducted by a student in a previous semester. This is not her expert interview. This was one of her supplemental interviews, which you also are going to do before you write your first story. But I think watching this more brief supplemental interview will be able to illustrate the point I'm trying to make about finding the focus. So let's take a listen and watch. It's about 2.5 minutes
Hi, my
long.
name is Maggie Thompson, and I work at Ooh La La Boutique on the Square. Maggie, do y'all lose a lot of business when the students go home for the holidays? Yes, actually, we kind of do. Like during the beginning of the week, we lose a little bit of business, but it picks up during like the actual like during like the Thanksgiving and Christmas, like the actual day or the day after. We did pretty good on the day and the day after. Oh, okay. How do y'all prepare for Thanksgiving and Christmas break? We just got a big shipment of clothes in, so we just get a lot of stuff in, new stuff in, put it out. We just make a lot of bags up and stuff, and just prepare, because there's usually like a lot of people Thanksgiving the day after, or Christmas or the day after. Oh, okay, awesome. In y'all's new shipments, do y'all have a lot of clothes and jewelry and stuff that can go with the holidays? Yes, we get like a lot of like seasonal things, like a lot of jewelry and clothes, like you said, that go along with the holidays, just like seasonal things. Perfect. So people can wear it to their fancy Christmas events and New Year's and Thanksgiving. Awesome. Yes. About how much clothes are you getting in for the holidays and this week and before people go home? We just got like a big shipment in for Thanksgiving. We got like a whole like almost like 2 or 3 big boxes and like a lot of jewelry, so a pretty good bit. Awesome. Do y'all have any sales going on before the holidays or anything? We have a 70% sale rack in the back, but starting Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of Thanksgiving, I think we're gonna have like a 20% off sale to bring customers in. Oh, okay, awesome. And then the day after Thanksgiving, I think we may have like a Black Friday sale or something like that. Oh, okay. Do y'all have a lot of student employees, and if y'all do, how do y'all get enough employees to work during the holidays? We do have a lot of students who go to Ole Miss here. A lot of the girls have asked off, like I asked off the second half of the week, and the other girls will ask off like the first half and just stuff like that. We just kind of have to work around it, but it works out. Oh, okay, good. Do y'all usually have a successful Black Friday? Yes, we do. Black Friday is actually, our boss was just telling us that Black Friday is actually one of the busiest days of the year. Oh, okay, that's good. So y'all are going to get a lot of business that day, yes, and y'all are excited for people to come home after Thanksgiving? Yes. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I really appreciate it. You're welcome.
Okay, so I hope that wasn't too painful for people that absolutely have no interest in shopping. But we've just watched that 2.5 minute interview, and let's say that you were going to start to write your story at this point. So how would you figure out a focus for this holiday shopping story? Well, I think there were actually clues to a number of different ways to focus the story. On the one hand, there's the story about Black Friday. You know, she references that they're going to expect to do really well on Black Friday. So in general, is that true for Oxford stores and boutiques? Is Black Friday a big deal? Now, it's likely that she's going to have to go out and do some additional reporting if she doesn't already have good quotes and good additional information on Black Friday. But that could certainly be a valid focus for this story, is how Oxford boutiques are affected by Black Friday. Another one is just holiday sales in general. So there was a lot of information that was a little too, quote unquote, inside baseball about how many boxes were coming in and what was going to be in them and, that kind of thing. But you could do a story about holiday sales. So how likely is it that local stores are going to be discounting merchandise, and what kind of bargains are to be had? That would interest a certain segment of the population. There's also a story about customer changes, although she did not follow up enough, in my view, on this subject, so she might have to go back to this interview or do more interviews with other people about this idea that during the school year, many of the customers are students, but that during the holidays, they get different types of customers. So it sounded to me like she was saying that they were going to lose student customers that they would pick up with other customers. And there was also the story about student workers and how difficult is it for stores during the holiday seasons to find help when so many students take off. So after doing all of these interviews, and again, this was one of the 3 interviews she did, this reporter decided that customer changes was going to be the focus. So in the end, her story was students leave but holiday sales continue with Oxford locals. So she had to do another interview and really focus the interview on getting better information about that. She did have some information on this topic already from the first interview she had done. So sometimes through the focus process, you find that you have to go back and do some different reporting, that the angle on your story changes, all of that, but that's part of the reporting process, right? So the more you learn, the more likely it is that you may have to do some additional reporting to be able to flesh out the best story of all the information that you learned. So this is what you're going to do. For your own interview, for the expert interview that you've shot and posted on YouTube, I want you to develop a focus for a possible story. So this only needs to be about a sentence long. It doesn't have to be comprehensive, every particular angle you could possibly take. But if you want to throw out more than one possible story focus, that would be fine. I'm going to give you feedback on whatever it is that you write. You need to come up with at least 2 more interviews you need to do that support the focus of your story and what information you need to get from that person, from those interviews. So be specific. If you can tell me exactly the name of the person that you're planning to interview and what you hope to get, that's awesome. Or at least the category of person. So maybe you would say, I'm doing a story about hiring student workers and the challenges that come along with that, and I need to talk to somebody who has been working their way through school. And then you're going to post all of the above under discussions on Blackboard. You'll find all the due dates there, but be sure that you jump on this quickly because you will be writing that first story before you know it.